As I mentioned, today we celebrate the feast of Christ the King. It is the end of the Church's liturgical calendar, and we are confronted with the question of ultimate reality, the sovereignty of God. It's not a fairy tale of kings and castles, but a real struggle of good against evil. So my gospel question about our locking horns with God is really about who is the absolute authority in our world. How often do we wrongly think that we are the ones in control, even though we all know that in a match like that, God is going to win? Yet I am amazed at how often we pick a fight with God. This makes me wonder that if in God we find our truest self, why do we resist the very thing that makes us truly happy? Truly who we are called to be. Since August, here in St. Louis, we've been painfully aware of how the violent spirit is not far from any one of us. We have a long way to go on the question of civil rights and economic oppression. It is good to remind ourselves of the very principles enshrined in our national struggle for freedom. We hold these truths to be self-evident: that all are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Even so, the fact is that evil can grow in us to the point of erupting in murderous thoughts and deeds. Cain took his brother's life out of jealousy. King Saul wanted to kill David out of envy. We all know that such violence, such anger, is something easily stirred up in us. Greed and wrath and envy were counted among the ancients as 3 of the 7 deadly sins. Civil unrest is nothing new. It's easy to incite people into a mob and a mob into violence. All you do is prick at those murky demons of greed. You should get more. The demons of envy. Look at them. Why do they have it and I don't? And the demons of wrath. The hatred and anger that wants revenge, that spawns even more hatred and anger. Get rid of them. Kill them. We'll be better off without them. Every Good Friday, you and I enter into the mind of the mob as the narrated reading of the Passion unfolds. We see how the crowd is stirred up. He doesn't obey our laws. How it is agitated. If you don't do something, you are no friend of Caesar. How it turns to violence. Crucify him. We want Barabbas. Crucify him. The Latin word for the crowd in these narratives is turba, which can also mean turmoil, chaos, disorder. We see our own English word, disturbed, comes from turba. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I am oddly taught to think classically. I look for causes. Like Aristotle, I want to know a thing rightly, and in order to do that, we must know it in its causes. So I ask you to bear with me. Why is it on the Feast of Christ the King, is it appropriate for us to examine the roots of our violent self that not only drives us to destroy one another, but also deludes us into thinking that we can kill God? This level of questioning requires of us an important capacity that I fear we all too often abandon. We resent the moral burden it places upon us, and that is critical self-reflection. The capacity to judge our actions, my actions, and to hold myself accountable. Notice in today's gospel that both groups protest, saying, "When did I see you naked or hungry or in want?" Both groups encountered these little ones, those considered least in very different ways. One group was moved to care. For them, they were aware that there was no difference from these little ones apart from their want. The other group was moved to dismiss them, to cast them outside the human family. But why? Perhaps a look at two different worldviews, two different ways of thinking about our world will help. One view sees the world and social progress as dictated by class struggle, the haves versus the have-nots. This kind of enmity is nothing new. It is pervasive in tribal thinking, whether it takes the shape of sectarian violence or political partisanship. This enmity was at the heart of Karl Marx's great work, Das Kapital, and his notion of class struggle, the violent underpinning of all radical revolution. But there is another way to understand our world, and that is in our being related to one another, our fundamental and ultimate oneness in the reality of a God who loves us. The gospel and today's feast reminds us that we are ordered to one another and to our God, to the God who loves us. This unity, this shared community, is about difference without division, solidarity without alienation. This feast isn't just about ending the liturgical year. It is something much more ultimate in its meaning. It is about confronting our pettiness and pride so that we might realize God is not dead, that we are ordered to one another by a will greater than our own, that the evils of anger, violence, and destruction can only be ended in love, in mercy, in forgiveness. The first reading from Ezekiel gives us the image of Christ as the Good Shepherd, the one who seeks out the lost, who brings back those who have strayed, who heals those who are infirmed. But it is Christ that makes divine justice real, calls us into relationship with one another and with God. Love transforms us, while our anger destroys us. We know this only too well, for vengeance is a destroyer, a poison that kills trust, a wound that festers, never allowing us to heal. Being vengeful is the surest sign of a heart that has strayed, of a heart that is ill-formed, of a dead and lifeless spirit. St. Paul beautifully reminds us that it is Christ who vanquishes even death, who reigns victorious over death itself. This new life, this new promise is the sovereignty of God. The feast of Christ the King is our call to true reconciliation, hearts made one in Christ. It is our call to true redemption, our being one and coming home to God. Matthew's gospel is a warning for each one of us and for us as a nation. In a fight against God, the only way to win is to let go, to trust the love that called us into being, to see in the least and in the lowly a call to live justly. In the second reading, Paul tells us that the ultimate end of divine sovereignty is for this, so that God may be all in all. Unity is our destiny. Christ reigns, not by power, but through gentle and humble hearts. Not in palaces or corridors of power, but in the lowly. Not by division and enmity, but by unity and love. Divine sovereignty is made real in a love that judges justly, that sees our neighbor's burdens and cares, that reaches out to the stranger a hand of welcome. May our world come to know the God who judges rightly, who even now directs our hearts. May our hearts be open to the one who safely shepherds us home.